The sky over Bakersfield was pale and cloudless when I pulled up to the house I once called home, my suitcase still rattling in the trunk of my car. It was spring break, and I had driven 4 hours from my university, eager for a quiet week in familiar surroundings. But what greeted me was not a house full of warmth or welcome. It was silence. It was emptiness. The front lawn, once overgrown with stubborn wild grass that I used to mow every Saturday, now stood manicured and too clean, interrupted only by a wooden post with a red sign nailed to it, for sale. The curtains that once swayed behind the windows were gone. The mailbox stood ajar, its insides hollow. My eyes caught something dark sitting on the porch. 3 large garbage bags slouched against the door like abandoned pets waiting for someone who would never come back. I got out, heart thudding, and approached them. One bag was half open. Inside were my high school notebooks, my old hoodie, the framed picture of our family vacation to Santa Monica 3 years ago, cracked glass now spiderwebbing over frozen smiles. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person I could think of, my Uncle Jared. His voice came after a few rings, slow and cautious. "Riley," he said, as if he had been expecting this moment. "They didn't tell you?" My breath caught. "Tell me what?" "Your parents moved last week. They sold the house." His words hung there like fog. "Didn't they call you?" "No," I replied, cold washing over me. "They didn't say a word." My fingers moved faster than my thoughts as I tried my father's number. It rang, then clicked. "Hello," he said flatly. "Dad, the house is empty. My things are in bags. What happened?" There was a pause, so long I thought he had hung up. Then he said, "We moved. You're grown now. Deal with it." Click. Just like that, he was gone. I tried my mother. Voicemail. My brother Mason. Nothing. Each call was a door slammed in my face. I stood there, phone limp in my hand, as the sun dipped behind the neighborhood rooftops. My shadow stretched across the driveway where I learned to ride my first bike. Across the porch, where we once hung paper lanterns for my quinceanera. Now, all that remained were bags filled with what used to be my life, and a sign announcing to the world that I had been erased. I loaded the bags into my trunk with robotic movements, hands trembling but jaw tight. I didn't cry. Not yet. I found a budget motel off Highway 99, its neon vacancy sign flickering like a warning. Inside the room, I laid my things out on the stiff motel bedspread: books, clothes, a broken picture frame. Pieces of Riley Solis, scattered and hollow. That night, while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the walls smelled of bleach and sadness, I made a decision. If they wanted to erase me, I would let them. But not without carving my own name into the world first. I would not disappear. I would not break. I would build something they couldn't touch. Growing up, I believed family meant forever. My parents, both immigrants from El Salvador, had survived with nothing but each other. My father often said, "Family is the only thing that doesn't fail you." He worked long hours at the steel plant while my mother cleaned office buildings, and they expected nothing less than excellence from me. I delivered. A 4.0 GPA. Weekend shifts at the bookstore. I even sent part of my scholarship stipend home each month. I thought that proved I was loyal. Worthy. I was the stable daughter, the responsible one, the girl who never missed a curfew. Mason, my younger brother, was the opposite. He got caught smoking weed behind the school gym. He dropped out for a semester. He once totaled our family's only car and still got a birthday cake 2 weeks later. I had never resented him. Not really, but I had noticed. In that motel, surrounded by the rubble of what I thought was love, I called the only person I trusted outside my family, Dr. Marinellis, my constitutional law professor and the closest thing I had to a compass. "They left without telling me," I whispered. My voice cracked. "I don't have anywhere to go." She didn't hesitate. "You're coming to stay with me." No debate. Dr. Ellis lived in a blue Victorian home filled with books, antique teacups, and 2 ancient cats named Roosevelt and Harriet. She gave me a guest room and a key. No end date. No lectures. Just space. Just grace. Instead of relaxing over break like everyone else, I buried myself in case studies and research. Dr. Ellis connected me to a summer internship at Brooks and Lane, a legal firm specializing in housing discrimination. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Turn the wound into a weapon," she said one night over tea. That's what real advocacy is. And I listened, because inside the wound was fire. Each morning I commuted into the city and sat in on meetings about wrongful evictions, slumlords, and gentrification battles. One day, I was asked to assist Camille Brooks herself with an intake interview. I watched as she soothed a mother of 3 whose landlord had changed the locks without notice. Afterward, Camille pulled me aside. "You listen differently," she said. "Like you've been on the other side of the door." I had stood on the porch of my past and found nothing waiting for me. And I realized something else that day. I wasn't just rebuilding myself. I was reclaiming what it meant to feel safe, to feel heard. And I wasn't going to do it alone. That's when the first spark of an idea began to form in me, small but growing, an initiative. A place for people like me. Students with nowhere to go. Tenants on the edge. A safe haven. A place that would not disappear without warning. A place that could not be erased. The idea kept me up at night. I would lie awake in the guest room of Dr. Ellis's house, the ceiling fan whirring above me like a slow clock, and picture it. What it would look like, who it would help, how I could make it real. The concept was simple but urgent. A legal and emotional support system for students and families facing housing crises. I scribbled notes in the margins of my law textbooks, filled pages of a yellow notepad with ideas, questions, possible names. Eventually, I landed on one that stuck, Safe Haven Project. I didn't tell anyone at first. It felt too fragile, like a flame that might flicker out if exposed too early. But that changed when I stumbled into a financial aid seminar hosted by the university, a requirement I almost skipped. The speaker mentioned social innovation grants, funding available for student-led initiatives that address community needs. I perked up, heart pounding. The deadline was tight, just 14 days, but I had already been living this idea. It wasn't theoretical. It was survival. The next morning, I told Dr. Ellis over breakfast. She didn't hesitate. "You write the proposal," she said. "I'll edit it, but you're the one with the story. Make them feel it." So I did. I spent 3 sleepless nights writing, deleting, and rewriting. I added statistics about student homelessness, testimonials from tenants I'd met through my internship, and quotes from housing policy briefs. Camille Brooks lent her expertise to refine the legal aspects, and Dr. Ellis helped shape the narrative. It became more than a grant application. It was my battle cry. A week after I submitted the proposal, something unexpected happened. I received a voicemail. The voice was unmistakable. My father. "Your mother is worried," he said stiffly. "Call us." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done. Just an expectation that I would fall back into place like nothing had happened. I didn't respond. 3 days later, another message arrived. This time angrier. "This silent treatment is childish, Riley. We're still your family." I saved the message, then blocked the number. One by one, I blocked every relative who tried to reach me. It wasn't out of hatred. It was preservation. That summer, the internship at Brooks and Lane deepened. I began leading intake interviews under Camille's supervision. I met elderly tenants whose rents had tripled overnight, young families forced into shelters, college students couch hopping to avoid sleeping in their cars. Their stories echoed mine, not in detail, but in theme: displacement, abandonment, being made to feel small in a world that promised more. One night, I stayed late organizing case files. Camille found me still at my desk at 9 p.m., surrounded by sticky notes and legal pads. She leaned on the doorframe. "Burning the midnight oil?" she asked. I nodded, unable to stop typing. "They're being offered 2 weeks in a motel," I said. 2 weeks for giving up their leases. It's not enough. They'll have nowhere to go. Camille folded her arms, thoughtful. "What are you going to do about it?" That question sat with me long after she left. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted Safe Haven to be more than a vision. I wanted it to be real. I kept refining the grant proposal even after submission, creating backup plans in case I didn't get approved. I started looking at community spaces we could use temporarily, explored how to recruit volunteer law students, and build a rough intake system using an old spreadsheet template I'd found online. Every time I felt overwhelmed, I reminded myself this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about all the people left standing on porches with nowhere to go. And then, the call came. "Congratulations," the voice on the line said. "Your proposal has been selected for full funding. $25,000 to launch the Safe Haven project." My heart stopped. I repeated the number out loud, half convinced I had misheard. Camille whooped when I told her, hugging me with both arms and spinning me once in the hallway. Dr. Ellis poured us all sparkling apple cider and made a toast to new beginnings. For the first time in months, I felt light. We set up shop in a dusty back room at Brooks and Lane, technically a converted storage space, but to me, it felt like a command center. We borrowed 2 desks, scrounged up donated office supplies, and hung a poster on the door with our logo, a sheltering hand drawn around a tiny house. Volunteers trickled in slowly, mostly second- and third-year law students earning clinical hours. We handled intake interviews, drafted letters to landlords, and educated tenants on their rights. By the end of the fall semester, we had helped 23 clients avoid eviction. Each case felt like a stitch sewing me back together. I was not just rebuilding others, I was reclaiming myself. Safe Haven became a lifeline not just for the community, but for me. Still, the calls from my parents persisted, now from unknown numbers and family friends. One text from my aunt read, "Your mother cries every night. Whatever happened, can't you forgive them?" I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Forgiveness wasn't a door I could walk through alone. Someone had to meet me there. And they weren't willing. Then, in the middle of all this, something strange happened. Our office line rang. I picked it up, expecting a client or caseworker. But the voice on the other end stopped me cold. "Riley." It was my mother. My entire body tensed. "How did you get this number?" I asked. "It's on your website," she said softly. "We've been trying to reach you. We're worried." I glanced across the room at a client, waiting for his appointment. "I'm working. You can't call this number again." "We're still your parents," she pleaded. "We have the right." I took a breath, steel in my spine. "You lost that right the day you put my things in trash bags and left without a word." I hung up. My hands shook for minutes afterward. That night, I told Camille what had happened. She listened quietly. "People rarely act out of pure cruelty," she said finally. "But that doesn't make their choices any less harmful. You're allowed to protect your peace, Riley." I nodded, but my thoughts wouldn't quiet. That phone call had unearthed something, a flicker of doubt, a whispered what if. What if there was more to the story? I tried to ignore it. I threw myself into Safe Haven, into casework, into my classes. But a seed had been planted, and it wouldn't stop growing. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the past barged in through the quietest of channels. I had just finished advising a sophomore named Jordan, who returned from winter break, only to find that his landlord had rented out his room behind his back. We were reviewing his lease when the office phone rang. I answered without thinking. "Safe Haven Project, this is Riley." There was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in months spoke softly. "Riley, it's Mrs. Cardenas. From across the street. Your old neighbor." I froze. Her voice brought back memories of warm tamales on New Year's Eve and the way she used to wave at me from her porch. "Sorry to call you here," she said quickly. "But I thought you should know something." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "Someone broke into your old house last night," she said. "Police think they were looking for valuables, but the place was empty. Your father asked me to check if maybe it was you coming back for something." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "I haven't been near that house since they left me there." "That's what I told him," she said. "But the police found an envelope. It had your name on it. A law firm's name, too. They gave it to me since I still watch the place sometimes." I sat up straighter. "Can you open it? Just tell me what it says." She hesitated. "Are you sure? Please." I heard paper tearing, followed by a long silence. Then her voice came back, lower this time. "It's about your grandmother. Your mother's mother. The one in Waka." My heart pounded. I barely remembered her. "She passed away when I was 13. "What about her?" "She left you something," Mrs. Cardenas said. "An inheritance. Property that was sold recently. And there's a bank statement. Riley, it says over $400,000. I couldn't breathe. That number didn't make sense. My grandmother had lived in a modest home in Mexico, never mentioned owning anything valuable. But then Mrs. Cardenas read the rest of the letter. The land had been purchased for resort development. 2 units sold, proceeds transferred into a trust. My trust? Does it say when this happened? I asked. She shuffled the papers. Finalized last March. My mind reeled. Last March. 1 month before I came home to find my life in garbage bags. The timing wasn't just suspicious, it was damning. They knew. I thanked Mrs. Cardenas and hung up, heart racing, a storm forming behind my ribs. The weight of betrayal suddenly had numbers attached to it. I called the firm listed in the letter. They confirmed everything. The inheritance was legitimate, the account had been in my name for over a year, and yes, the initial notification had been sent to my legal guardians since I was still 19 at the time. My parents had received the letter. They had known. They had hidden it. And then, they had left me. I didn't tell Camille or Dr. Ellis right away. I couldn't. The betrayal was too layered now, personal, financial, ancestral. My grandmother had left me a legacy, and my parents had tried to steal it with silence. 4 days, I moved through my routine in a daze. I helped clients file claims, led team meetings, and studied case law like everything was normal. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore. I was ready to confront the people who had tried to write me out of my own life. And yet, the confrontation didn't come on my terms. 2 weeks later, I was preparing for the most important presentation of my life. Safe Haven had been shortlisted for the Langston Foundation's annual social justice grant. $300,000 over 3 years, enough to hire staff, rent real office space, and scale our services citywide. Camille and I had rehearsed the pitch for days. I arrived early, blazer pressed, notes triple-checked, nerves taut like wires. We were halfway through the presentation when the boardroom door opened. A foundation assistant whispered something to Mr. Langston. He looked at me, apologetic. Miss Solis, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are people here claiming to be your family. They say it's urgent. My mouth went dry. Camille glanced at me, her expression unreadable. I turned back to Mr. Langston. Please tell them I'll speak to them after we finish. This is too important to pause. He nodded, clearly impressed by my composure. The door closed behind the assistant, and I forced myself to keep speaking, voice steady even as my pulse roared in my ears. We finished the presentation. I shook hands. I smiled. I walked out of the boardroom feeling like my insides were on fire. There they were in the reception area. My mother stood first, eyes shining with a mix of hope and guilt. My father remained seated, arms crossed. Mason hovered nearby, older now, but still carrying that look of someone trying to shrink into the background. I could feel every set of eyes on us as I approached. Why are you here? I asked coldly. How did you find me? We saw the article in the paper, my mother said. It mentioned the presentation today. Riley, please. You've been trying to reach me for months, I interrupted. 247 calls, to be exact. None of them with an apology. My father stood. This has gone on long enough. You're being dramatic. I laughed, sharp, humorless. I came home and found my life in trash bags. You moved away, sold the house, and didn't leave a number. That's not dramatic. That's abandonment. My mother's voice cracked. We were ashamed. We were struggling financially. The house was being foreclosed. I stared at her. Then why didn't you tell me? I was sending you money every month. You knew about the inheritance. You got the notice from the law firm. They went quiet. The silence was more damning than a confession. You kept that money from me, I said, barely above a whisper. And then you discarded me like I was nothing. So tell me, what do you want now? My father opened his mouth to answer, but I was already turning away. We'll talk somewhere else, I said. Not here. I didn't want them near Safe Haven. Not near the one thing I had built on truth. The coffee shop was half empty, sunlight slanting through tall windows, catching dust in the air like glitter suspended in motion. I chose a booth in the corner, far from the door, where no one could hear us clearly. My parents and Mason slid in across from me, stiff and silent, carrying the weight of everything they had not said for almost a year. My father sat with his arms folded, jaw clenched like always when he felt cornered. My mother fidgeted with the edge of a napkin, eyes flicking between mine and the table. Mason barely looked up. I didn't waste time. You sold the house. You didn't tell me. You left my things in trash bags on the porch. And now you want to talk. Why? My mother took a shaky breath. We were drowning, Riley. Your father lost his job. I couldn't keep up with the mortgage. We were going to lose the house anyway. You could have told me, I said, voice like ice. You didn't just disappear. You made a choice. You erased me. She flinched, but my father spoke. We didn't want you to see us like that. We were ashamed. You had your own life at the university. We thought it was better this way. No, I said, leaning forward. You thought if you disappeared before I found out about the inheritance, you could keep it. You knew what was coming. You got the letter from the lawyers. You opened it. You saw the number. You made your choice. They both went pale. My father didn't deny it. He stared out the window. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We didn't think you'd find out, she whispered. Not then. Not so soon. We thought maybe we could fix our lives and come back to you later. When things were better. When we had something to offer. You had me, I said, voice rising. You had me, and I was already giving. I was sending you money. I was working myself into exhaustion trying to make you proud. And you threw me away like I was in the way. Mason finally looked up. They made a terrible mistake, he said quietly. They thought they were protecting you. It was wrong, but they were scared. And greedy, yeah, but mostly scared. I looked at him. My little brother. Taller now. Sadder. You stayed with them, I said. You knew they left me. And you stayed. I didn't know about the money, he said quickly. Not until later. I swear. And when I did, I told them it was messed up. I tried to call you too, but I stopped answering numbers I didn't recognize. I finished for him. We sat in silence for a long moment. My coffee went cold in front of me. My mother wiped her eyes. When we saw the article about Safe Haven, we saw what you'd built. We realized what we'd lost. It's not the money. It's not just the success. It's you. You're our daughter. No, I said quietly. You had a daughter. You chose not to have one anymore. And now you're here because the world finally saw me. Because now, I'm someone you want to be proud of. That's not fair, my father said sharply. We raised you. We worked hard for you. And I honored that. I shot back. I honored every sacrifice you made. But when it was your turn to stand by me, you vanished. My voice shook now, not with fear, but with fire. I don't need closure. I don't need apologies that come with excuses. What I need, what I demand is space, respect, and distance. You don't want us in your life anymore, my mother asked, voice barely audible. I want a life that's mine, I replied. Not one I have to keep justifying to people who discarded me. I pulled out my wallet, left a 20 on the table to cover the drinks, and stood. I hope you find peace, I said softly. But I won't let you steal mine. They didn't follow me as I walked out. They didn't call after me. Outside, the city air hit me with a rush. I inhaled deep, as if I'd been underwater for a year and only now broke the surface. The sun was warm. The world was loud. And I was still standing. That night, I told Camille and Dr. Ellis everything. The inheritance. The confrontation. The weight of it all. We sat on Dr. Ellis's porch, wine glasses untouched beside us, as crickets filled the dark. They didn't offer advice. They didn't try to spin it with silver linings. They just listened. And that was enough. The next morning, my bank app showed the transfer complete. $412,000. I stared at the number for a long time. It didn't make me feel powerful. It didn't make me feel free. But it did make me feel capable. Secure. I wouldn't have to worry about rent. I could fund Safe Haven if the grant fell through. I could build something with my own hands and my own name. The next day, the call came from the Langston Foundation. We had won. The voicemail was short, but it carried the weight of everything I had been working toward. Miss Solis, this is Samuel Langston. I'm pleased to inform you that the Safe Haven project has been selected to receive full grant funding, along with an additional $50,000 for operational support. We're honored to support your vision. I played it 3 times just to hear the words again. Full funding, additional support, recognition. It felt unreal. Camille burst into tears when I told her. Dr. Ellis hugged me, so tightly I could feel her own heartbeat pounding. We celebrated that night with takeout from our favorite Thai place and cheap champagne poured into mismatched teacups. The next week flew by in a blur of planning meetings, expansion drafts, and lease negotiations for a new office space. We moved out of the dusty back room and into a 2-story brick building on Jefferson Avenue, previously a dentist's office. The space was modest but full of potential. I stood in the middle of it one morning, imagining rows of desks, intake rooms, a waiting area with warm lights and soft chairs. A place where no one would feel discarded. We hired 2 full-time staff members, both law graduates with eviction defense experience, and brought on a rotating roster of student interns. A retired judge volunteered to help with legal education workshops. I created new intake forms, a training manual, and a partnership with the city university to earn interns academic credit. We became more than a student project, we became a real force. And the work kept coming. Students referred by counseling services, elderly tenants facing illegal lockouts, single parents trying to hold on to the only homes their children had ever known. Every time we helped someone stay, every time we delayed an eviction or forced a landlord to fix hazardous living conditions, I felt another brick laid in the foundation of the life I was building. This one wasn't made of guilt or debt or sacrifice. It was made of choice, of integrity, of purpose. One day, a local reporter named Nina Tran reached out for a feature story. "People need to hear what you're doing," she said. I was hesitant. I didn't want to be the story. I wanted Safe Haven to be. But she was persistent and kind, and after spending a day shadowing our team, she wrote a piece that captured the heart of what we'd created. The headline read, "Asterisk left behind but not broken. How one student built a safety net for the forgotten." Asterisk. The article went viral. Overnight, our inbox was flooded with messages from volunteers, donors, people sharing their own housing crises, and yes, messages from old classmates and professors who had no idea what I'd been through. Camille printed out the article and taped it to our office kitchen wall. Dr. Ellis brought over a cake that read, "You did this." For the first time in months, I allowed myself a moment of stillness. I looked around at the people who had shown up for me, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Home. A week after the article ran, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name in tight, familiar script. Inside was a short note. "Riley. Asterisk, we read the article. You were right about everything. We don't deserve forgiveness, but we are proud of you. Always asterisk. Mom." There was no mention of the inheritance. No plea for reconciliation. Just 7 lines of truth wrapped in silence. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into the back of my desk drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a boundary. An acknowledgement that they understood, finally, that words couldn't fix what actions had broken. And still, a small part of me hoped they meant it. But I didn't reply. Safe Haven continued to grow. We received recognition from a national housing justice network and were invited to speak at a university conference in New York. I gave my first panel talk in front of 300 attendees, describing how the project began, not with a vision, but with a porch, 3 garbage bags, and a silence that nearly swallowed me whole. I spoke of chosen family, of people who offered me rooms when mine was gone, of strangers who listened when blood turned its back. I finished the talk by saying, sometimes the homes we lose make space for the ones we build ourselves. When I stepped down from the podium, the applause was thunderous. But more than the sound, I saw the faces, nodding, crying, clapping, not just for me but for themselves, for their stories, for the possibility that something beautiful could grow from something broken. That night, alone in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and looked through Safe Haven's intake log. We had served over 90 families. 90 families who now had time to breathe, to fight, to rest. I thought of my grandmother, of the inheritance she left, of how she might have smiled to see that her final gift was not wealth, but freedom. And in that moment, I knew something else. I hadn't just survived what they did to me. I had turned it into shelter. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came the arrival of new interns, new clients, and a new phase of Safe Haven's growth. The office now buzzed with energy every day, phones ringing, conversations echoing down the hall, volunteers sharing breakthroughs over microwave leftovers. We had made it. We were no longer a fragile idea held together by hope. We were a foundation, one that people depended on. One afternoon, I returned to my desk to find a thick envelope sitting on top of my files. I opened it carefully, half expecting another grant notice or legal document. Instead, I found a formal invitation embossed with gold lettering. The Langston Foundation cordially invites you to the annual Justice and Innovation Awards Gala, honoring outstanding contributions to equity and advocacy. There was a second sheet beneath it, my name. Riley Solis, recipient of the Changemaker Award. My breath caught. I hadn't known we'd even been nominated. I showed it to Camille first. She screamed so loudly our new intake coordinator came running. Dr. Ellis teared up when she read the letter. That weekend, we shopped for dresses like teenagers going to prom. Camille chose a sleek emerald gown. I wore a midnight blue satin wrap dress that made me feel equal parts lawyer and warrior. The gala was held in a ballroom lit with cascading chandeliers, the kind of place I'd only ever seen in movies. I stood on that stage, the spotlight warm against my skin, and accepted the award with a short speech about dignity. About how it's not something granted by institutions or titles, but something reclaimed when people are finally seen and heard. When I stepped down, applause thundered through the room. In the crowd, I saw Camille smiling, Dr. Ellis dabbing her eyes, and 3 of our former clients beaming proudly at their advocate turned honoree. But then, beyond the brightness, I saw another face. My father. He stood near the back, half in shadow, hands clasped in front of him. He didn't clap. He didn't wave. He just watched. I froze for half a second, then turned away. I didn't ask how he got in. I didn't care. This was not his moment. The next day, a package was waiting for me at the office. No return address. Inside was a wooden box containing old photos, me at my 5th birthday party, holding a balloon bigger than my head, me at 8th grade graduation, grinning in braces. At the bottom was a single photo I hadn't seen before, my grandmother standing outside her home in Waka, arms wrapped around me as a toddler. We were laughing, and behind us was a garden full of marigolds. There was a note. Just 3 words. She chose you. No signature. I kept the photo. I returned the rest. By late summer, Safe Haven received a call from a public television producer. They wanted to feature our story in a documentary series about youth-led change. At first, I hesitated, not because I feared attention, but because I wanted the focus to be on the work, not the wounds. Camille said something that changed my mind. Your story is part of the work, and others need to see what happens when we choose ourselves. Filming began a month later. I gave interviews in the office, in the community, even in front of the now empty house where my childhood had ended. The crew captured the small things, our morning coffee rituals, the client who always brought homemade muffins, the whiteboard in our war room filled with color-coded case notes. When the documentary aired nationally, we were flooded with messages. People from all over the country, students, single parents, immigrants, survivors, wrote to say they felt seen, that our story gave them permission to believe in something better. And then silence. My family never called again. No more voicemails. No more uninvited visits. No letters. No emails. They disappeared as suddenly as they had come back. At first, I didn't know what to feel. Relief. Sadness. Maybe both. But in the space they left behind, I found something far more lasting. Peace. I no longer feared their absence. I no longer ached for answers that would never come. I no longer needed validation from those who had taught me how to survive by leaving. Because I had created something greater than restoration. I had created safety for others and for myself. And with every case, every voice defended, every home protected, I laid another brick in the fortress of the life they couldn't take from me. Not with silence, not with shame, not even with blood. Some ties break because they were never strong to begin with. But others, the ones you choose, the ones you build, they hold. They hold through storms, through betrayal, through fire. And in the quiet after the chaos, I knew something true. Not all families stay, but the ones who do, they're the ones worth keeping. The morning after the documentary aired, I woke up to a full inbox. Messages from journalists, housing advocates, students in need, and complete strangers filled my screen. A woman from Portland wrote, "You told my story before I found the words." a teenager from Detroit said. I didn't know people like me could be leaders. I sat in bed, sunlight warming my legs through the sheets, scrolling through message after message. Most were filled with gratitude. Some were filled with stories, raw, real, unfiltered. Stories of eviction, of betrayal, of resilience. That day, I walked into the Safe Haven office to find two of our interns crying quietly in the corner. They had watched the documentary together the night before and hadn't realized how much our work meant until they saw it from the outside. I hugged them both, and we started the day not with paperwork, but with a circle of voices. We took turns sharing why we were here. Not for credit, not for accolades, but for the little boy who clung to his mother's coat when she told him they were being forced out. For the senior who waited 3 hours in the heat for her landlord to unlock a door. For the quiet girl who once stood in front of her house and found only silence and 3 bags on a porch. The work intensified. Local schools started referring more students to us. The city council invited us to testify at public hearings about housing reform. Camille and I split our time between policy meetings and client support, juggling everything from media appearances to volunteer training. Safe Haven was no longer just surviving. It was thriving. And I knew it was time to think beyond it. One evening, after the last intake form had been filed and the lights dimmed across the office, I sat down with Dr. Ellis and Camille in the war room. The whiteboard still held the week's case list. My eyes traced the names, the notes, the victories and losses. I took a deep breath. I want to build something more permanent, I said. Camille raised an eyebrow. More permanent than Safe Haven? Not instead of it, I clarified, but something alongside it. A foundation. One that funds student-led advocacy centers across the country. We can call it the Solis Initiative. They looked at each other, then back at me, and nodded. That night, we stayed up sketching plans on printer paper, fueled by leftover takeout, and a shared sense that this was only the beginning. I used part of my inheritance, just a fraction, to see the foundation. I wanted it to start not with a donor's name, not with a boardroom's blessing, but with my grandmother's gift. The land she left behind. The money my parents tried to hide. It was poetic, almost. What they had meant to erase had become a legacy. 6 months later, we launched our first satellite project in Chicago. 2 interns from Safe Haven relocated to oversee it. A year after that, we opened another in Phoenix, then another in Atlanta. Every center bore the same values: dignity, advocacy, justice. Every space welcomed those who felt discarded. During our first national convening, bringing together all the leaders of the regional hubs, I stood on stage and looked out at a sea of new advocates. Mostly young. Many first generation. Some survivors of homelessness themselves. They weren't there because of credentials. They were there because they had stories. And stories, I had learned, could build entire cities if you knew how to wield them. In the back of the room, Dr. Ellis clapped with quiet pride. Camille sat beside her, arms crossed, eyes shining. I hadn't just found mentors. I had found family. That night, as I walked alone to my hotel, I passed a mural painted on the side of a community center. It was a row of colorful houses under a deep blue sky. In the center was a phrase in bold white letters. Asterisk, home is not a place. It's a right. Asterisk. I stood there for a long time. When I returned to Bakersfield 2 years later, I went alone. Not to reconnect. Not to seek answers. But to say goodbye. The house had new owners, a young couple with wind chimes on the porch. The maple tree still stood tall in the yard, branches reaching toward the roof. I didn't knock. I didn't stay long. I left a small envelope in the mailbox with a note that simply read, Asterisk, this house taught me everything I needed to know about leaving. Thank you, Asterisk. I walked away without looking back. Because the truth is, I no longer needed a childhood home to feel grounded. I carried home with me. In every courtroom I entered. In every family I helped. In every space I built from scratch. And in the people who had chosen me not because they had to, but because they believed in who I had become. This was the shelter I carried forward. Unbreakable. Unshakable. Mine.